So now we're going to be taking a look at Metal Fighter Miku. And before you ask, no, it has nothing to do with Hatsune Miku. But anyways, this show is considered as a science fiction, sports, and comedy. But I'd also like to add in here that it does have some little hints of being a magical girl show. Mainly because they have the transformation sequences in every episode, and all the fighters in this show are all female. But those are the only two things that does make up for that, so I guess that's kind of why they didn't mention it there, but either way, now let's start talking about the story. So it's the year 2061 AD, and there is a very popular sport going around, and it happens to be Neo Pro Wrestling. Which is exactly what you'd suspect, it's just typical wrestling, but this time there's actually some power armor for some really big enhancements, like power, speed, and balance, and so on. So the main focus is on the wrestling team called the Pretty Four, and they happen to be Miku, Ginko, Nana, and Sayaka. And they all have some personality, where Ginko is a tomboy, Sayaka has a complex of her physical appearance, and Nana just likes anything that's fucking cute. And Miku is the main character, as you can tell from the title, and she's a pretty typical leader protagonist, where Neo Pro Wrestling was something that she's always loved as a kid, and she always looked up to one wrestler named Aquamarine, because Aquamarine is the world champion. But before the Pretty Four got into Neo Pro Wrestling, they were actually known as pop star singers, so they already have a pretty big enough following to be established. But before their manager applies for the big championship, they have to get a new staff member, which is for the coach, and that happens to be Ichie Suyo, who is a coach who is always drunk all the time and is pretty burnt out on everything, and of course he kind of acts like an asshole. And while his methods may seem a bit harsh, at least he does get the job done. In fact, he was actually the former coach of Aquamarine. So day by day, they have to go over many different circumstances, while also wanting to challenge their idol, Aquamarine. And of course, there are many different things that go on behind Neo Pro Wrestling. And that is pretty much all I have to say about this one. It's very simple and very straightforward. So now let's talk about the animation. And the animation in this one is fairly good. It does have some bright colors and some really good designs. Actually, I find that the designs in this show kind of remind me of something out of a Mega Man game, which is pretty cool. Although there are certain parts that do kind of lack a little bit of detail, but it's nothing too major. And since this show has a whole lot of fighting in it, of course, the fight scenes are pretty over the top as you would suspect, but are at least fairly fun. So everything here is pretty standard stuff, but is at least pretty good. So now, as for the music within this one, I find it to be just okay, where it's not really good, but it's not bad either. It's just the main thing is that it's just not that memorable. Which is not a bad thing, it's just one of those things where, I can't say a whole lot about it because it does suit the show, but nothing really stuck out to me. So the music really just does the thing that it does and just plays in the background, and well, I just didn't really notice a whole lot about it, but at least the opening theme song is actually pretty catchy. So now, if we're going to be talking about the voice acting, oh man, is it ever crap. So let's talk about the cast. So you have Michelle Ruff playing Miku and Nana, and of course, Michelle Ruff is actually a really good voice actor. She's actually one of my many favorites, but I find as these two characters, she's just not all that good. Not only did I find it to be kind of annoying, but they also just didn't have a whole lot of emphasis put into some of their emotions, so yeah, unfortunately Michelle Ruff just didn't do a good job with this one, or maybe it was just the director, who knows. And then you got Alice Fairnaz as Ginko, and she just doesn't do a good job either, it's just kinda meh. And then Ellen Stern as Sayaka is just kinda mediocre, which is also unfortunate because Ellen Stern is actually pretty decent. In fact, she is actually the wife of Richard Epcar, which is pretty awesome. And speaking of Richard Epcar, he actually plays in this show. In fact, he actually plays the coach Eiichi. And as to be expected from one of my favorite voice actors, he actually does do a pretty decent job here. In fact, it's probably the best role within this show. Now obviously it's not his best work ever, far from it, but it's definitely a lot better than everyone else in the show. And then you got some other pretty decent voice actors, so you got Bob Botchholes, and then there's Doug Stone. But as good as they are, unfortunately they didn't do a great job here either. So while this show actually does have a pretty decent cast, it is very unfortunate that all the cast that they do have here just didn't do the great job that they could have done. So while I do think that the voice acting is pretty crap for the most part, I'm not gonna blame it on the voice actors, I think it's more has to do with the director. Because in case you don't know, if there is a show that has a pretty bad dub, 9 times out of 10 it's usually the director. Although there are some situations where the voice actor is the one at fault, but over here, I'm pretty sure it's more the director. So now, if I were to rate this one, I think I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10. It's a very simple, lighthearted show about sports, and a very over-the-top sport at that. And while I do think lighthearted fun is never a bad thing, my only real complaint with this show is that I do find that some of the characters could have been developed a bit more. Now yes, when the four girls develop as a team, it's pretty good, and then of course their development with the coach is also really good. The problem is that I do find that the characters themselves don't really have a whole lot of personality. Like I said, it's the tomboy, the one that likes anything that's cute, the glamorous one, and then of course there's the leader type. And I kinda wish you'd know more about them more than just that. So it is unfortunate that they are on the one-dimensional side. But on the good side, at least this show can actually be funny since this show is considered a comedy after all. So it's a pretty simplistic show, much like the one that I talked about yesterday, which was Oh My Goddess. Where both shows are lighthearted fun that are not overly amazing, but are at least somewhat entertaining. So if you want to watch some girls wrestle in a bunch of power suits that kind of look like something out of Mega Man, then yeah, you'll definitely like this show. But as for me, I do kind of like it, but I do wish there was a little bit more to it, especially with the characters. Oh, one last random thing I want to mention here that I thought was kind of amusing is that when Miku transforms into her power armor suit, she ends up getting turquoise hair. It's probably a coincidence, but whatever. So overall, this show is pretty decent for the most part, but it's mostly just fun enough. Or more accurately, it's just mindless fun.